Definitely relate. Ooh, that was loud. Did, Me and Miss Melva were trading dog stories, so I can feel her pain. She can feel my pain. Well, I'm glad that you guys are here. You guys are sitting together. Glad everybody's getting along well, that you're sitting amongst one another tonight. What I'm going to do tonight, maybe a little different than what I've done in the past. I do want you to be finding Genesis 36 and 37. We are on a journey through the book of Genesis, and we've come to Genesis 36 and 37. I'm not going to review all of chapter 36. In fact, I'm not going to read hardly any of chapter 36 because there's a bunch of names in it. And I thought about letting either Sandy Helms or Angela read these names for us tonight, but I'm not. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to you. And so, no, I'm joking. I'm absolutely joking. I really meant Ejer, okay? Ejer and Randy. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to have you read all these names because I'm not going to read all these names. I'll be honest with you. 99.99999% of them are very hard to pronounce. But I also didn't just want to blow this chapter off, because it's there for a reason, right? And I think they're worth looking at. In fact, in your outline, I've kind of given you an outline of what chapter 36 is all about. This is really the last big chapter in the book of Genesis that relates to Esau. Now, you'll be reminded for the last maybe several weeks, several weeks, if not the last couple of months or 3 months or so, that we've been looking at the life of Jacob. Now, keep in mind that Jacob and Esau, they are how relationally? They're brothers. They're twin brothers, okay? Which is the oldest? Esau. Esau's the oldest. Remember that? As a matter of fact, they came out of the womb with Jacob hanging onto the heel of Esau. Okay, you remember the story? Matter of fact, when they were fighting amongst themselves in the womb, remember that? And Rebecca didn't understand. Like, hey, feel like there's a war going on in there, and I don't really know what's going on. And God revealed to her that the reason why there's a war going on because these boys will be opposites of one another. Okay, in this case, opposites do not attract. They will be at war with one another. In fact, the two people groups that will come out of them. One being the Hebrew people, because you remember Jacob was the succeeding one through the Abrahamic covenant, and then Esau would be the one that, because he did not get the blessing that he was entitled to because he'd sold his birthright, and then Jacob duped his father Isaac into giving him the blessing, and then this became a war over the family farm, so to speak. You've got the Arabs, which basically is what Esau represents, and then you've got the Jews, is what Jacob represents. And today, even today, think about this, thousands of years later, you have this battle over family property. That is the nation, or being the nation of Israel. And so, what I want to do tonight is I want to just maybe look at a few names and point them out, or at least make reference to them, and then we're just going to move right on into chapter 37. I basically said that you can divide up Genesis 36 into two major headings. If you look at verses 1 through 8, you really get the personal history or the family life of Esau. In fact, we're introduced to his wives. Now, here's what I want to point out to you about his wives. If you'll look at Genesis 36, beginning in verse 1, I will read a couple of verses here because I want to point something out to you that you might want to mark. This is Genesis 36, verse 1 says, "And now this is the genealogy of Esau." So basically what we are getting here is a biographical sketch of Esau, okay? And then notice, he's called this twice in the book of Genesis chapter 36. Do you notice that next statement? It says, "This is the genealogy of Esau," and then there's this next three words, "who is Edom." Mark that. Make a note of that, and it'll be repeated again in verse 8, where it says, So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir, and Esau is Edom. What's the significance of that? I'm going to come back and tell you in just a moment. Why is it being pointed out who Esau is Edom, and why is it being pointed out that Esau is Edom again in verse 8? Why? We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then verse 2, we're told about his wife. So we're getting the personal family life history of Esau here, and we're told about his wives. And here's what it says. And Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Now you'll remember that this was a problem for Rebekah. Y'all remember that? In fact, when he got really angry with Jacob for stealing his blessing, if you'll remember that, from his dad, Rebekah came and was telling, hey, we need to send our son away because I don't want to have my son killed. But if you'll go back to, let's say, chapter 27, this is worth our time. Go back to Genesis 27. And let me read verses 41 through 46. Again, just want to lay some groundwork here. Genesis 27, verse 41, it says, and so Esau hated Jacob because of the blessings which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Verse 42, and the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, so she obviously got wind of it. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Verse 43, now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Verse 44, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away. Now she's fully expecting that out of sight, out of mind, as time heals all wounds. By the way, how many of you know that's not true? Time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes time wounds all heals, as they say. And so she's thinking that he's going to just send him away for a few days and he'll cool down and whatnot. Well, then we come to verse 45. It says, until your brother's anger turns away from you and he forgets what you have done to him, then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And here's verse 46, I think is a pretty important verse because it clues us into something. And Rebekah said to Isaac, look, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of what? The daughters of Heth. And she's worried about whom Jacob would take a wife. Now, why would she be worried about that? It says, I'm weary of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, like these who are the daughters of the land, okay, what good will my life be? So she's worried to death. I say worried to death. She's definitely concerned about the future mates of her sons. Now, if you go into chapter 28, okay, and look at verse 6, we see Esau, he's starting to think about this, and look what he goes and does. This is chapter 28, Genesis 28, verse 6. And Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take himself a wife from there, that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. So Isaac tells Jacob, and this was part of the blessing that he gave to his son Jacob, look, don't be marrying these pagan women, okay? Go away, find a woman of our own kind. Verse 7 says, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padan Aram. But look at verse 8. Look what Esau does. And Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abram's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife in addition to the wives that he had. Well, what wives would he have? Why would Rebekah be concerned about the possibility of Jacob marrying these daughters of Heth? Because Esau had already done it. He had already married some women of the Canaanites, which were obviously opposed to the people of the nation of Israel. And now you go back to Genesis 36, and let me point out something to you. Matter of fact, he married at least 3 pagan women. Verse 2 says, this is Genesis 36, verse 2, and Esau took his wives from the daughters, now watch this, of Canaan, and we're told her name. We're given these are their original names. At a later time, or this is a portion of scripture we've already covered, when he's introducing these wives to his parents are kind of scolding him about this, and he kind of gives them more Jewish type names, but they're not listed here. They're listed here in verse 2 as their original names from their pagan land. So Adah, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zimeon, the Hivite. Okay, so you've got a Canaanite and a Hivite. Verse 3, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nahajah. So now you've got an Ishmaelite. Okay, now keep in mind, Ishmael is only Jewish through the line of his father. Certainly his mother, Hagar, was not Jewish, because where was she from? Egypt. Who said Egypt? That's right, Egypt. She was an Egyptian, right? And it says, and now Adah, now watch this, Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Ruel. Now watch this. So from two of these pagan women, he has one son each, right? Now look what happens. And then verse 5 it says, Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. So you've got a Hittite, an Ishmaelite, and a Canaanite. And all three of these people groups are vehement enemies to the nation of Israel. And out of these are going to form what's known as the Edomites, who were absolutely enemies to the nation of Israel. In fact, so you see what happens here. So he has one son each through these other two women, and then through this other wife, how many children did he have? He had 3 sons. Now here's what's interesting. When you look at this woman who bore him 3 sons, obviously maybe she had, you could say, well, she was more fertile than the other. That's a possibility. Or maybe she was his favorite. I don't know. But here's what's interesting. When you read through the rest of the genealogy through chapter 36, here's what you're going to discover. Even though these other women only had 1 son each, their sons married and had multiple grandchildren for Esau and these grandmothers. But this woman that had 3 children, how many grandchildren do you think she had? None. 0. I just find that very interesting. Okay? And so in verses 1 through 8, you have his personal history. And these wives' names, they're repeated several times. Okay? And then in chapter 36, verses 9 through 43, you see Ishmael's political history. So you don't just see his personal history, his family life, but you also see his political history. Because what happens is, as his family begins to have this population explosion, they begin to dominate these various regions, and he becomes a very powerful individual as it relates to the Edomites, okay? And again, they become one of the prime enemies to the nation of Israel as you work your way through the Old Testament. Here's what's interesting about this. Now keep in mind, who wrote the book of Genesis? Moses. Now here's what's interesting about this. What you have recorded in the book of Genesis, from creation to the fall, to the flood, to the calling of Abraham, and the life of Abraham and his family, Isaac, Jacob and Esau, and to where we get to Joseph, really going all the way through the last part of the book of Genesis. And by the way, the life of Joseph covers 25% of the book of Genesis, a significant portion, far more than Abraham, far more than Isaac and far more than Jacob. So think about that. This is the role that that Joseph is going to play. But here's the thing that I want you to find, that I find very interesting. Moses, who wrote the book of Genesis, also wrote the other 4 books of the Pentateuch, which would be what? Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's right. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are written from a personal experience. Okay? Meaning he was alive in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He was not yet born when the book of Genesis was written. Well, how could he write a book when he wasn't born during that time frame? Word of mouth, but even more importantly, who revealed it to him? God did. So think about this. This is the reason why I know that Genesis 36 is an important chapter, because this is not something that Esau has come up on his own. This was revealed to him, certainly I think by word of mouth. I think maybe even his own mother, Jochebed, would have shared some of this information with him. But more importantly, God revealed it to him in all of these details because, let's be honest, some portions of that even she had not been privy to because she was not born yet. But over the course of time, she had learned the nation's history, and no doubt that he had learned it through there as well. But God certainly saw fit to put it in there. And so that's what I wanted you to see as we think about Genesis 36. I certainly didn't just want to skip it and blow it off thinking, it's insignificant, because it is significant. Because not only of Esau's personal family history, but also because of their political history. And you think about these opposing forces, the nation of Israel and the Edomites or the Arabs, okay? And now we come to Genesis 37, really what I wanted to kind of get to tonight. And I want to just talk to you, work our way through this particular text. If you would just follow along, let me just read all 36 of these verses. And as I read through, I'm going to say this, hey, mark that, okay? And so, because I'll probably forget when we're working our way through it. Let me read them, and then I'm going to have you mark some things, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Genesis 37, beginning in verse 1. You just follow along as I read aloud. Here's what it says. And now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan, okay? Now here, verse 2, you have a first mention. Here's a first mention, verse 2. This is the history of Jacob, and we're told about Joseph being how old? Mark that, because here's the first time for you Bible trivia buffs, if you're ever asked this question, hey, where in the Bible is the first teenager mentioned? Genesis 37. How old would that teenager be? 17, okay? This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, okay? And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. Now remember, Bilhah and Zilpah were the maidservants to both Leah and Rachel, right? And his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them to his father. Underscore that. I think that's something interesting. We're going to talk about that. He brought a bad report of them to his father. Verse 3, now again, Israel is Jacob, one and the same. The name's been changed there. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Uh-oh. Because he was the son of his old age, and what did he do? He also made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, what did they do? Mark that. They hated him. Now watch this. They hated him so much that they could not speak peaceably to him. Did your mom ever say to you, hey, if you can't say anything nice? Did your mom, how many mamas ever said that? Boy, I heard that. If I heard that once, I heard that 1,000 times. Maybe that's in play here, because they're saying that they hated him so much that they couldn't even speak to him. So maybe Rebecca, maybe Bilhah, maybe Zilpah, maybe Leah, these other boys' mothers, said to them, hey, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I don't know. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. I think we've already read that. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Verse 7, then Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and then again we're told this. So the second time we're told they hated him even more. Verse 6, so he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field, underscore sheaves. Then behold, my sheep arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheep. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And then here's that phrase again. They hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. By the way, this is not the last dream he has. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father, now watch this, his father rebuked him. This is Israel or Jacob rebuking him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept this matter in mind. So on the one hand, his father rebukes him, like, hey, you're kind of talking out of your head. And then on the other hand, it's like he takes a step back and he's taking all this in, like there must be something to this. Verse 12. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Mark that. Very important. Put a star by it, underline it, whatever it is to draw your attention to it. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to them, here I am. Then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they have departed from here, for I have heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Watch this, verse 18. Now when they saw him afar off, now again, they see him at a great distance, okay? When they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But watch this, Reuben. Now who's Reuben? He's the oldest. So some wisdom starting to come here. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into the pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, and he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, and the tunic of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him in the pit. And I find it very interesting. The Bible says that the pit was empty, that there was no water in it. What do you think the significance of that is? Huh? God knew, but what's the significance of there being no water in it? It's dry, but even more than that, what happens if it's full of water? He's probably going to drown, right? I don't know that they taught swimming back then, okay? So that's significant that they threw him in a pit that had no water in it because he was not going to drown. Verse 25, and they sat down to eat a meal, and they lifted their eyes and looked. There was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there that we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders pressed by, so the brothers pulled him up, and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him for the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Mark that. I'm going to tell you how much that is in just a moment. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. So Reuben is obviously away when they do this, and he's panicking. Verse 30, and he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? And they took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is? Now watch this. They don't say, do you know if this is our brother's tunic? What do they say? Your son's. Is this your son's tunic? Isn't that interesting? Verse 33, and he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, mourned for his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose and to comfort him. And he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus the father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So he was sold to the Midianites, and the Midianites turned around and sold him into slavery in the Egyptian market. Well, there's several thoughts that I want to think about as we work our way through our text tonight. I hope that you mark those. We'll come back and talk about those. I want to begin by talking about the forgotten scene. I say the forgotten scene, a forgotten scene. I want to kind of recap what's going on in this family's life. And one of the things that we've said over and over about the family of Isaac, and it spilled over into the family of Jacob, was what? How dysfunctional it was. Now, let's be honest. Any of you have any dysfunction in your families? My wife and I debate about whose side of the family is more dysfunctional, okay? I certainly have a lot of dysfunction on my side of the family, and my wife's family certainly is dysfunctional. Sorry, Mom and Dad-in-law, if you're watching online. It is what it is, okay? And so when you think about this family life, about you, again, you think about Jacob and what he went through as a child, and what we learn about Jacob and how he treated his kids. You remember when we looked at Genesis, 34, when Dinah's hanging out with people she shouldn't be hanging out with, and she got involved in a relationship with some pagan people, and you'll remember Shechem said, you know what, I want to marry her, I'll give you whatever you want, and they make this deal with the family. And then what happened after that, as they're going to make this deal, Levi and Simeon go out and wipe out Shechem and his dad and the entire community. Remember, Jacob came back and said, hey guys, you have just made my life that much worse. And so when I think about the life of Jacob as relate to his family, not only was his family dysfunctional, but you'd really stop and think about it, Jacob was a very passive father. He was not one who held his kids accountable. He was not one who taught discipline in the life of his kids. And I kind of compare that to today's age. Now, let's be honest. You, as a parent, we think about a parent being a noun, okay, a mom and a dad. But you ever thought about this, a parent being a verb? And what I mean by that is that we're not just to be parents, we are to parent. And I know some of you probably are best friends with your kids, but before you become best friends with your kids, you need to be a mom or dad to your kids. Let me say that again for those not listening. You need to be a mom or a dad to your kids. You need to be able to hold your kids accountable. And I think one of the biggest reasons, and Angela, you're an educator. We have any other educators in here? Sharon, you were an educator for many years. I think one of the biggest problems with kids today is that we have a parenting problem. And the parenting problem is parents have refused to be parents. I think I told y'all this story when Kyle was in the 8th grade. He'd gotten some zeros on a science thing, and he was failing the class. He's failing 8th grade science. And obviously that didn't sit well with me. And so during the conference time, I called his science teacher and was just inquiring about, hey, why is my son getting these zeros? Can you just tell me, is he not turning the work in? Because if he's not, I will take care of it from home. And this teacher goes off on me. I mean, really goes off on me. and think, well, you know what, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm thinking, hey, time out, time out. What? I said, look, I didn't come to challenge you. I just come to find out. If you can tell me if my son, is he just not getting the work done? Is he not turning it in? Or is the stuff that he's turning in not good enough? He goes, well, he's just not turning in the work. I said, that's all I need to know. I promise you, I will take it from here. I promise you, from Kyle's mom and dad, you will get the support from home, okay? And they say I went home and lit into Kyle, and before you know it, the grades started to come back up. But I'll never forget what that teacher said to me. He said, you know what? He said, Mr. Coffey, I apologize. He said, you'd be amazed at the number of conference calls that I get. And he said, they don't go like this. Most of the times we're being blamed as the fault because their kids are failing. I said, no. You do your job. I promise you, we'll take care of our job on this end. I'm your friend. You got a problem with Kyle? And Kayla's coming up next year. You got a problem with him? There's my personal cell phone. You call me. I promise you, I will handle it personally. He said, I need to learn who my friends are and who my enemies are. And I think, wow, what a sad state of affairs we are in our education system today. And the whole point being, when you think about a forgotten scene, and we're going to see this in how Joseph's brothers respond to him and how they hated him, you remember, where do you think Jacob got this idea of showing favoritism? Y'all remember that? Remember Isaac favored Esau and Rebekah favored Jacob. And there are times, let's be honest, there are times I don't want to overstate this or understate this or to make a statement that's not true about us. My kids swore up and down that Kayla was my favorite. And Kayla swore up and down that my boys were my favorite. So it was a no-win situation, okay? And one of the things that we strive to do, especially when it came to birthday gifts and Christmas presents, we strive to, if we bought one kid this dollar amount, the other kids got the exact same dollar amount. We never wanted our kids to feel like that we were one-upping the other. They were equal in our eyes. And to this day, they are all equal in ours. They're our three children, they're our flesh and blood. We love them equally, and so on and so forth. And so Jacob does a very bad thing here. And then what we're going to see in just a moment in point number 2. But again, thinking about this forgotten scene, about how dysfunctional this family was and how passive Jacob was toward his kids and not holding them accountable and not exercising discipline in their lives. Well, let me move on to the second thing. That's when we get into verse 1 and 2, because right away we discover something about Joseph in his relationship to Jacob, or Jacob in his relationship to his son Joseph. And Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. Verse 2, this is the history of Jacob and Joseph, watch this, being 17 years of old. Now keep in mind, what happened to Jacob's, by the way, who is Joseph's mother? It'd be Rachel, right? Rachel and Leah are sisters, and remember he got duped and he married both sisters after having to work 14 years. You remember, by the way, what does the name Joseph mean? May God add. Okay, you remember that back in chapter 30, I think it was? Chapter 30, verse 24, this is after she gives birth to Joseph. This was the firstborn child of Jacob and Rachel, again, the woman he loved. And she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And eventually he does. He gives her Benjamin, remember that? And so Benjamin and Joseph are literal blood brothers. They are Jacob and Rachel's two sons. You remember what happened to Rachel when she gave birth to Benjamin? She died giving childbirth. And so now he is 17 years of age. And Joseph spent up till his mid-teenage years not having his mother. You know, all these other women are still alive, but Rachel is dead. And so he is growing up without a biological mother. And so he's 17 years of age, okay? He is father's favorite. That's what I want you to see. Not only a forgotten scene, but now I want you to see a favored son, And again, it's never good as moms and dads or even grandparents to play favorites. I agree with that. It's never good. Nothing's going to work out of that. And by the way, not only did Joseph, I'm sure, know that he was a favorite to his father, but who else knew that Joseph was a favorite to his father? The brothers. And we saw this over and over again, the fact that they hated him for it. And so imagine living in that kind of home where anything and everything that Joseph wants, he gets. And let me just say this before I move on. When we think about a favored son. When you think about the life of Joseph, I would say this for me personally. I think when you think about the Old Testament Bible characters, Joseph might very well be my favorite Old Testament character. Let me tell you why. Because he is a type, if you will, a typology of the Lord Jesus himself. Don't leave here saying, oh my goodness, Brother Bill said that Joseph is Jesus. No, I didn't say that. But I'm saying that he is a type of Jesus, because you're going to see in Joseph's life that he is a man of integrity. He's going to be sold for money, okay? He's going to have a lot of bad things go against him. He's going to have people where they hate him as his brothers hated him. He's going to be sold into slavery. But also, when you come to the end of the book of Genesis, what does Joseph end up doing for his brothers and his family? He basically saves their lives from pending death, and Jesus does the same thing for us as well. Well, let's look at this real quick. We need to pick up the pace. So they hate him. Verse 3 says, and now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. Now, this is very interesting to me. What was that movie that came out? What was the movie about Joseph? What was it called? I'm drawing a blank. Was it Joseph in the Technicolor coat? Well, think about this. I say that real fast, right? Think about this coat or this tunic of many colors. This coat, I meant to throw a picture up, at least an idea of what it looked like. Think about this coat, it having all of these bright colors on it, but it would be like a mink coat, for lack of better ways of putting it. You know, the sleeves would be long, and it would go down almost to the ankles. And so what's the significance of that? Obviously, I'm sure he wore it all the time, right? And so what do you think that prevented him from doing? Work. And so if he's not working and everybody else is out there slaving with the sheep, don't you know that they hate their brother even more? That, hey, not only is he Dad's favorite, not only did Dad give him something that he didn't give us, but he don't have to work. So you can just see this animosity continue to build. But then look what happens. Now I find this also very interesting. Verse 5 says, now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Now again, verse 4 said that they hated him so much that they couldn't even speak to him. I mean, how bad, what do you think that home life was like? Verse 6 says, so he has this dream, and he's telling it to his brothers, and now we're being told what the dream is. Verse 6, so he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. And here's the dream. He says, think about the sheaves or these crops growing up in a field. And one of these sheaves represents me, and the rest of these sheaves represent you. Basically he's saying, he says, then behold, my sheep rose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood up all around and bowed down to my sheep. Now again, we think about on Sunday mornings, we're going through Matthew 13, and Jesus is speaking in parables, and the disciples are thinking, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? His brothers did not need an interpretation here. They already knew what he was implying here. You say, well, how do you know that? Look at what they said to him. They're saying to him, he said, hey, my sheep is going to rise up. Your sheep are going to rise up, but they're going to bow down to my sheep. And his brothers, again, didn't say, hey, what do you mean by that? Look at what they said. And his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they're thinking, man, this guy's nuts. So they hated him even more for his dreams, for his words. And if that was not bad enough, it gets worse, because not only does he have one dream, he has two dreams. Not only does he dream about sheaves, he also dreams about stars. Verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. So now, again, we're not left to interpret this. They know exactly what he's talking about. In fact, when he tells his brothers and his father assumes, so I'm the sun, your mother's the moon, and your brothers are the 11 stars? And look what happens. Verse 10, so he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? So think about this. This imagery of them being under his authority in an earthly way, but then he talks about the sun, the moon, and the stars and authority over them in a heavenly way. Verse 11, and his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So we see a forgotten scene in this dysfunctional life of this family. I mean, just really, really, really sad, especially the fact that Jacob refused to be a stand-up dad to his kids and hold his kids accountable. And then you see this favored son and what the animosity that it produced in the life of the family. And if that was not bad enough, now he has a dream, not once but twice, and the image of this dream is what? Yeah, not just bow down in worship, but hey, you guys are going to be dependent upon me. I'm going to, for lack of a better way of putting it, I'm going to lord over you, okay? You're going to be the servants of me. And then we come to this last major point, and we see not only a forgotten scene and a favored son, but a foul scheme. A foul scheme, F-O-U-L, a foul scheme, because the brothers have heard all that they want to hear. So what do they begin to do? They begin to plot against him. Look at verse 12, and I need to pick up the pace here. It says, then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. You remember having you mark that when we first read through that? What's the significance of Shechem? Does that name ring a bell? That's where the family was slaughtered. So think about this. Here's the boys, the other 11 boys. They're out feeding the sheep. I say the other boys, 10. Surely Benjamin's not out there with them. So these 10 boys, they're out there. They're feeding the sheep, right? They're taking care of the family business, but they're in Shechem. What are they doing in Shechem? We really don't know at this particular point. But here's what I find incredibly interesting, is that Israel, again, remember who Israel is. That's Jacob. He says to Joseph, he knows that his boys are tending sheep in Shechem. And by the way, do you think that the people in the region of Shechem have forgot about what Simeon and Levi had done? You can bet your bottom dollar they had not forgotten. Then Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? But here's the one advantage that the brothers had. They at least had a group of them. But look at what his favorite son, look at what Israel does to his favorite son. He says, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? He says, come and I will send you to them. So he said, here I am. Then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out in the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Think about this, his favorite son. Do you not realize how dangerous this is? Because he's traveling alone. Right? He's sending him into the possibility of disaster. Verse 15. Now a certain man found him. There he was wandering in the fields. Think about this, a 17-year-old. He's out wandering. And the man asked him, saying, hey, what is it that you're looking for? What are you seeking? He says, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding my flocks. In other words, if you've seen them. He said, oh, yeah, I've seen them. They have departed from here, and I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brother and found them in Dothan. Verse 18, now when they saw him afar off. Now, why do you think they were able to see him far off? I think that coat kind of stood out, right? I'm sure the sun was reflecting off of that. It's probably even blinding to them. And they saw him afar off. Even before he came near, look at this, they're already thinking about killing him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. By the way, that wasn't a compliment. That was sarcasm, I'm sure, dribbling down their beards. He says, come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will come of his dreams. And again, I find it interesting that they are plotting to kill their brother, their younger brother, but it's Reuben of all people who stands up, the oldest brother, who stands up and says, no, we're not going to kill him. This is the not right thing to do. Now, why do you think that he's opposed to killing him? Do you remember what Reuben did? He had a relationship with Bilhah, remember that? One of the maidservants, which was really a slap in the face and an act of disrespect to his own father. I'm wondering if he's not eat up with guilt about that. And he's thinking, you know what? If we were to kill our brother, that would be the ultimate disrespect for our father. And I cannot do that. I cannot let you do that to him. So you know the story. Let's fast forward a little bit. Verse 23, so it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. So they ripped it off of him. Verse 24 says that they took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water. Again, we mentioned that a while ago. And verse 25, I find this very interesting because now they're not just out there eating sandwiches. They're having a meal. They've got Joseph down in a pit, wondering what they're going to do with him and how they're going to explain it to their father. Now they're eating a meal, verse 25, and they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah, now isn't this interesting? Judah, of all the brothers, comes up with this idea. Hey, you know what? Reuben's right. We shouldn't kill him because we won't get anything out of that. Judah says in verse 26, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, I'll tell you what let's do. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then the Midianites traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph out and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, what's the significance of 20 shekels of silver? Try saying that real fast. Not only the price of a slave, but it's the price of a maimed slave. So in other words, you are selling him as cheap of a slave as you can possibly save. And I looked up on the line today, what would be in today's dollars, what would 20 shekels be? You ready for this? It'd be about $6.20. So they sold their brother as a slave for about $6.20. Can you imagine what it was worth then, if it's today's money? Now, Reuben must have been away because he comes back to the pit and he's looking for his brother because I think he's thinking, you know what, after a while, my other brothers, they'll kind of cool off and we'll kind of taught him his lesson. You know, we're not going to give him his jacket back. We're not going to give him his coat back. We'll pick him up and we'll go back and maybe he'll learn his lesson and not be telling us these ridiculous dreams. Verse 29 says, and Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. He's thinking, oh my gosh, they have killed him. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? What are we going to do? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Now watch this. The imagery here is, hey, we were on our way home, and along the way, we have found this jacket. It looks familiar. Hey, would you see if this is, again, not our brother's jacket, but your son's? Again, you see that venom or that hatred toward him. And then what does Israel do? He confirms it. Verse 33, and he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him without doubt. Joseph is torn to pieces, and Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. Can you imagine what it was like for Joseph that first night? And maybe it says for many days that he mourned his son, what it was like going over in his overhead, you know what? I'm the one that sent him out alone for this purpose. You ever been haunted by guilt? Have your mind ever played mind games on you? You ever had that? You ever had the mindset woulda, shoulda, coulda? I'm wondering if that's what's going on in the life of Jacob or in the life of Israel here. What have I done? I signed off on my own son's death warrant. I should never have done that. And I wonder, it's not recorded here that he prayed at all, but I wonder, he had a relationship with God. I wonder if he spent many nights praying, God, you've got to do something. You've got to do something. Verse 35, and it says, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But what happened? He refused to be comforted, and he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. And thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. And we'll certainly read about that when we get to chapter 39, the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife and the role that he played in that mess. And even though when you think about what's going to happen in the life of Joseph as we go through the rest of the book of Genesis, it just seems like one catastrophe after another. And you want to think, man, God, you took the promise of the Abraham covenant and you gave it to Abraham. You took it and you gave it to Isaac instead of Ishmael. You took it and you gave it to Jacob instead of Esau. You took it, instead of giving it to Reuben, you've given it to Joseph. But yet, you've got all of this trouble that's brewing and going on in the life of Joseph. God, where are you? And what's the answer to that question? Did y'all hear what Miss Melva said? God's saying, I haven't moved. This is all being worked out according to my plan. And when you think about it, Romans 8:28, even though that had not yet been written yet, is being filled in his life. In fact, God's sending Joseph through all of these calamities. And by the way, where did he get this dream from? That was a God-given dream, no question about that. He's going to send him through heartache and trial, and even to the point of being falsely accused and going to prison, all for the sole purpose of one day raising him up, because he would not have been raised up in Pharaoh's court had he not been sold into slavery to the Midianites, who not sold him into slavery to the Egyptians, who had not put him under authority in Potiphar's house to be accused and placed into prison, because Pharaoh's going to have a dream, remember that, going to need an interpreter. And Joseph's going to go, and next thing you know, Joseph gets put into the second in command of all of Egypt at a time, just such a time as this in the life of the people of Israel, because there's going to come a famine, and there would be no money for them to buy food. But Joseph, being in the place that God had put him, even though he had to go through all of that calamity, God had put him there for just such a time as this. So learn this about your life and my life. There are no accidents in the economy of God. God still rules and reigns in the kingdom of men. Amen? Now, when you think about the story that we read today, if I were to ask you, give me one takeaway. You're going to leave today and go home in a little bit. What would be maybe one life lesson in what we've just read and what we just looked at that you would take away about this study tonight? I got 2 or 3 I'm going to give you. Wait on the Lord. Huh? Yeah, God always has a plan, right? God doesn't sleep. He doesn't slumber. His angels don't go to him and say, oh, God, did you hear what happened to Barbara Conroe? What happened to Barbara Conroe? No. God knows. He knows, right? He's never caught unaware. That's good. Anybody else? Oh, man. Lesson learned, right? Oh, man. Yeah, did you hear what Susan said? It doesn't matter how much we mess up. And by the way, I'm looking at a bunch of messer-uppers. And by the way, you're looking at the ultimate messer-upper, okay? God's plan never gets altered. Amen. If we would ever learn that. That is a hard pill to swallow sometimes, isn't it? That God's plan is...
Look back at Joseph right now. He ain't where he's supposed to be right now. He's not supposed to be here. God has done told him to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was in the wrong place, so he caused all the problems right to him.
Yeah, God had to rearrange where he would be, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought I saw a hand go back up here. What role do you think, would you say, prayer plays in all of this? Again, we're not told that Israel or Jacob prayed, but what we know about Jacob and what we've studied in previous weeks, I don't think there's any question that he spent a whole lot of time praying. And I wonder if he didn't start repenting about, hey, you know what? I'm kind of reaping what I've sowed by showing favoritism, and I've got my own sons who are enemies against me here. Man, we need to be people of prayer, and we need to pray for our families. You pray for your family. Amen? Anything else?